Welcome to Part 6, our final part in the 6-part series of the study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon wraps up his most intriguing of books. King Solomon wrote this 3,000 years ago. In it, he has posed some of the great questions for all of mankind. In himself, being given wisdom, it is particularly intriguing that he would ask these questions and was unable to find the answers to many of these, but posed them nonetheless. The book of Ecclesiastes, in part, tells the story of Solomon's struggle to understand life's greatest dilemmas, questions, and mysteries. Solomon, for all of his wisdom, did fall victim to the influence of the many wives and concubines that he had. And they led him astray, and ultimately into idolatry. Our study has been the compilation of a 31-part study, in which we have taken off little bits at a time through the 12 chapters to look at some of the great portions and questions that Solomon posed in here. Last week, we looked at chapters 9 and 10. What happens after life? The enjoyment of marriage, the uncertainty of life, and the role that chance plays in it. How a little folly can ruin a reputation, and the responsibility of the rulers of a nation. In this week, our final, in the 6-part series, we will look at the concluding thoughts of Solomon as he brings to an end this fascinating book. He'll talk of the rewards of generosity, the mysterious ways of the baby in the womb, the fleeting nature of youth and the body as it wears out with age, and Solomon's conclusion when all has been said, the climax of this book. I hope you'll enjoy tonight's lesson and learn what Solomon, the inspired writer who penned for us all those years ago, and see that they are as relevant today as they were then 3,000 years ago. And now, let's begin our final study today. Welcome to day 27 of our study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. The title of today's lesson is Cast Your Bread Upon the Waters. Our verses today come from Ecclesiastes chapter 11. We'll begin reading in verse 1. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand. For you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. I have a small box that I keep in the basement of our house. It's mostly empty, except for a collection of pieces of string. I have labeled this box, Pieces of String Too Short to Use. I borrowed that saying from Donald Hall's book, String Too Short to Be Saved. It was a recollection of summers on a New England farm. My box really doesn't contain any pieces of string in reality. It is a constant reminder to me of my penchant for collecting stuff. My obsession with collecting very valuable artifacts that have incalculable value. Junk, really, to most people. Over the years, as we have moved, I have made an attempt to greatly reduce the amount of stuff I save. At one point, consolidating it into bins marked stuff to be sorted later. They are filled with stuff, you guessed it, that I am going to eventually get around to sorting out one day. I've sorted them, cataloged them, photographed them, and still, there they are. I'm not a hoarder, really. At least, that is what I've convinced myself. Really, I'm all right. Hoarding is a fascinating study of the human spirit. Experts have not completely figured out what exactly causes hoarding. But according to the Mayo Clinic, they are studying genetics, brain functioning, and the stressful life events to determine their role in this disorder. Children who have been abandoned or adopted will hoard food from time to time. The reason is thought to stem from the idea that they will be abandoned again and the food will help them survive. There are people who hoard animals by the dozens or hundreds. They may see the animals as surrogate children, fearing the animals could be euthanized and only they can care for them. There are others who hoard things that eventually become a problem when the articles encroach on their living space, stacked from floor to ceiling. It leaves little room to even navigate within the home. TV shows and series have been dedicated to helping hoarders. It's an uphill battle and many times a losing one. One of the descriptive words that kept appearing in articles that I read was fear. A fear that they will one day need one of those items and not have it if it is discarded. A fear they will run out of food. A fear that no one will care for their animals. This video is not intended to be a fix for hoarding, but only to give an extreme example in life. For most people, collecting things is not an issue. However, hanging on to things and an unwillingness to give them up is a very real problem with many of us, and I'm not exempt from this. The 11th chapter of Solomon's book begins with a rather enigmatic phrase. One's first encounter with this verse may leave them scratching their head and wondering why on earth one would throw bread in the water. Are we feeding ducks? But stick with the passage and a pattern will emerge. We don't typically sow bread on the water in hopes of reaping a crop. We wouldn't think of sowing seeds of grain that way either with the expectations of gaining a future harvest. But think in terms of the Israelites. What is the staple of their diet? It's bread. After all, manna was called the bread from heaven. For, so Jesus tells us in John 6:31, our fathers ate manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Bread was the sustenance of daily life. But why water? Water will carry it away. How is it possible to find it again after many days? What Solomon is speaking of is hospitality, generosity, and alms. Show generosity to others without the expectation of it coming back to you, and it will come back, and with an increase. This entire passage lends itself to the idea of a life of hospitality and giving. Yes, indeed, be generous to others, for as verse 2 tells us, you never know when it is you might meet with disaster, and then you will indeed be in need as others are now. In verse 3, who knows the events as yet unforeseen? When the cloud is full of rain, it pour forth, whether on the plains, the valley, or the desert. So it is with the falling tree. Who knows the direction it shall fall? In verse 4, the one who is prone to always watching for signs of the right time to do things will often be thwarted to his own demise. But the person who presses on in spite of such things will be blessed. We've known of those times when we have not gone ahead with an event because of the weather looked to be inclement, only to see the sun come out and we regretted not pressing on. These principles are taught throughout Scripture, as we shall see. In Proverbs chapter 11, beginning in verse 24, we read, one gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered. The people curse him who holds back grain, but a blessing is on the head of him who sells it. The prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 32 and verse 20, "Happy are you who sow beside all waters, who let the feet of an ox and the donkey range free." Jesus said in Luke chapter 6 verse 38, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." Paul set forth the eternal principle in Galatians chapter 6, beginning in verse 7. "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith." Over and over it is taught. Proverbs 22:9, "Whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor." As even the law set forth in Deuteronomy chapter 15, beginning in verse 4. "But there will be no poor among you, for the Lord will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess, if only you will strictly obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandment that I command you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he promised you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow, and you shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it might be." Have you found the way of giving to others to be better than the way of hoarding to yourself? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson in the book of Ecclesiastes. Welcome to day 28 of our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. The title of today's lesson is "The Way the Spirit Comes to the Bones in the Womb." Our verses for today are found in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way of the Spirit comes into the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity." Algorithms, according to Wikipedia, is defined as such. In mathematics and computer science, an algorithm is a finite sequence of well-defined instructions, typically used to solve a class of specific problems or to perform a computation. Algorithms are used as specifications for performing calculations, data processing, automated reasoning, automated decision making, and other tasks. In contrast, a heuristic is an approach to problem solving that may not be fully specified or may not guarantee correct or optimal results, especially in problem domains where there is no well-defined correct or optimal result. Now, let me tell you, I have no idea what that means. But this should make it a little easier to understand. Simplified, it means, as an effective method, an algorithm can be expressed within a finite amount of space and time, and in a well-defined formal language for calculating a function. Starting from an initial state and initial input, perhaps empty, the instructions describe a computation that, when executed, proceeds through a finite number of well-defined successive states, eventually producing output and terminating at a final ending state. The transition from one state to the next is not necessarily deterministic. Some algorithms, known as randomized algorithms, incorporate random input. Oh, yes, now I get it. Now I know I'll never understand this. But computer people get it, and that's what's important. They write codes that determine algorithms that in turn help me find stuff on my search engine, my GPS, my social networking, and I'm guessing about anything that involves a computer. But the roots of algorithms go back to the ancient Babylonian and Egyptian mathematicians and became formalized under a man named Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, whose Latin name actually was translated algorithmy. In its simplest form, broken down so I can understand it, is a set of instructions that tells how something is to be done. The conversation now begins with the question little children ask. No, this is not about algorithms. They ask, how are babies made? Which leads the adult to begin, when two people love each other. And don't worry, that's as far as I'm going to go in that direction. I don't know of any adult that tells a child initially when asked that question that will then launch into the whole journey involved with the egg becoming fertilized, the part DNA plays, and how each cell decides if it's going to be the heart, the foot, the brain, or some other part of the body. We don't know if that baby will have its father's features or its mother's. We can peer into the tiniest parts of the baby's development, but experts are still baffled by the complexity of it all. Interestingly enough, even PBS's Nova episode dedicated to the human development entitled it Life's Greatest Miracle in its November 20th, 2001 episode. We are now some 3,000 years into the future of Solomon's writing of the Book of Ecclesiastes. Mankind has looked further into space than ever before. We have peered deeper into the subatomic level than ever before. We know the exact detail of every muscle, organ, enzyme, material, and more of what makes up the body. Yet, we cannot give those compounds life outside the natural process. We can't mix them up like we do making a cake and voila, out comes a baby. It is still true today what Solomon proclaimed millennia ago in Ecclesiastes 11 verse 5. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in a womb of a woman with child. Therefore the conclusion that follows is also true. So you do not know the work of God who makes everything. As the psalmist declares in Psalm 104:24, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. And again in Psalm 139, beginning in verse 13, For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. The whole of chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes is leading us to trust in God Almighty, in His omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and every other omni adjective we can come up with that attempts to describe the immeasurable nature of God. It is simply beyond our ability to grasp, or for that matter, calculate the incalculable possibilities involved in fitting it all together. Solomon keeps telling this over and over in Ecclesiastes. In chapter 3 and verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And again in chapter 7, beginning in verse 23, all this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? And yet again in chapter 8 and verse 17, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. And declares at the end in Ecclesiastes 12:12, my son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. As even Paul declares to the church at Rome in Romans 11:33 and 34, oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are His judgments, and how inscrutable His ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been His counselor? Solomon's writing is like the gentle waves that keep washing up to the shore. Each wave brings a little bit more of the ocean and moves a little bit more of the shore. Solomon keeps bringing to us more knowledge, and with it a greater understanding of God and His ways. Yet there is a point at which we simply cannot grasp anymore. Just as the ocean can only go so far and no further, we are assured that God has created this world and sustains it in ways we can only imagine. In this life, God desires us to carry on and rejoice in all we do. There are caveats, however. In verse 8 of chapter 11, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Now, Solomon begins to bring this all into focus, and with it, the admonition to the young, verses 9 and 10. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. He will continue this thought into chapter 12. For all the algorithms that are making choices for us in our everyday lives in ways we are not even aware of, they pale in comparison to the manifold wisdom of God. As the hymnist wrote, when this passing world is done, when has sunk yon glaring sun, when we stand with Christ on high, looking o'er life's history, then, Lord, shall I fully know, not till then, how much I owe. Do such thoughts fill you with wonder and awe of Almighty God? Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson from the book of Ecclesiastes. Welcome to day 29 of our study in the book of Ecclesiastes. The title of today's lesson is Youth and the Dawn of Life Are Vanity. Our verses for today come from Ecclesiastes chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Life is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So, if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart, in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Here are some quotes. Too bad youth is wasted on the young. The longer I live, the more uninformed I feel. And finally, only the young have an explanation for everything. Those are clever quotes about being young. It's hard to find good quotes that come from young people. I wonder why that is. But for my money, Charlie Brown and his friends in the Peanuts cartoons had an awful lot to say about life for being such young kids. For instance, Charlie Brown said, "I've developed a new philosophy. I only dread one day at a time." Linus said, "Big sisters are the crabgrass in the lawn of life." Lucy said, "Try not to have a good time. This is supposed to be educational." Charlie's sister, Sally, said, "I think I've discovered the secret of life. You just hang around until you get used to it." And finally, that lovable little dog, Snoopy. "Yesterday I was a dog. Today I'm a dog. Tomorrow I'll probably still be a dog. There's so little hope for advancement." Of course, those were from the mind of Charles Schulz, the creator of the Peanuts cartoon series. It was the life through his eyes that we really saw in the characters of his work. A sort of innocence of youth mixed with the wisdom of the aged. I think Art Linkletter's show, Kids Say the Darndest Thing, gave us some real insight into the mind of children. When Art asked one little boy about what was the hardest thing about school, the little boy replied, "Buttoning my pants." Another girl, when asked about what the perfect husband would be like, she replied, "Someone who provides lots of money and loves horses and will let you have 22 kids and doesn't put up with fights." When Art followed up with the question to her about what she was going to be when she grew up, she replied, "A nun." Now there's some real nuggets of wisdom. Solomon had a considerable amount to say about youth and being young, mostly in a cautionary way. From his book of Proverbs, we read in Proverbs 1, verses 8 through 10, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." And in Proverbs 2, beginning in verse 1, he says, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding." And finally in Proverbs 3, we read, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you." In fact, the first 9 chapters of Proverbs are a series of essays, as it were, directed toward the young to learn wisdom to guide them throughout life. Then, wise sayings of life follow in the remainder of the book. I have linked the Book of Ecclesiastes to the Book of Proverbs throughout this study, for I believe they are so very similar. I've often thought in my own mind that the book of Proverbs was written earlier in the life of Solomon and Ecclesiastes later in his life. Many scholars believe the same thing. Now, in chapter 11, these last few verses, Solomon turns and heads for home with his teaching. He's going to wrap it all up for the reader to consider. Once again, it seems as though this treatise of sorts is directed to the young, and in particular, the young adult, the youth of perhaps in their teens. For the very young are not going to grasp such complex principles as Solomon has laid out and will finally bring to bear in the last chapter. And for that matter, many in our advanced years struggle with the concepts Solomon has brought forth in this most intriguing of books. My sister and brother-in-law had an interesting conversation with an elderly gentleman many years ago, and what she related from that talk has stuck with me over the years. This gentleman lived in a house that had no windows, and with all seriousness, he told them that if they knew what was coming, they would go out and hang themselves right then. Now, that's not the person I want teaching young people of this age, or any other age for that matter. Youth need hope, and that is exactly what Solomon brings to the young man. Verse 9, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes." In a sense, be glad you are young. Your whole life lies ahead of you. Enjoy life. As was mentioned in yesterday's lesson, he also adds a caveat, a warning. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. What's further in verse 10? "Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity." Even today, what Solomon declared in Proverbs rings true. In Proverbs 20, verse 29, "The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair." There is a term that is heard from time to time as it relates to that which is done in one's youth. It's called youthful indiscretions. That is to say, those regrettable deeds done in one's youth that can be explained in a sense by declaring these were committed without the advantage of age and wisdom that would prevent one from doing such things. The mantra of the 1960s counterculture declared, "Never trust anyone over 30." First espoused by Jack Weinberg at UC Berkeley. It seemed to be a rallying cry for the young. Now that those who survived the 60s are themselves in their 60s and beyond, I would imagine some, and hopefully most, have seen the vanity of such youthful indiscretions and the advantage age has over youth. But if they haven't come to that conclusion yet, well, let's just say they will get a charge out of what Solomon has to say when next we meet and look at chapter 12. Are you ever trying to relive your youth, or do you now prefer age and wisdom? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson in the book of Ecclesiastes. Welcome to day 30 in our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. The title for today's lesson is, "I Have No Pleasure in Them." Our passage for reading comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 12. We'll be reading verses 1 through 8. "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near of which you will say, 'I have no pleasure in them.' Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel is broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. I get a kick out of the cartoonist that brings the Maxine humor to light. She says such things about aging like, your 50s aren't too old for contact sports. Contact the doctor. Contact the nurse. Contact the therapist. She also says, at my age, the number one fashion question is, can you nap in it? Or how about, young at heart, old everywhere else? And finally, they say you are supposed to listen to your body. We stopped talking years ago. Then there are the song titles from our youth, the parodies of which have been adjusted to reflect our age. Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely walker. Or, how can you mend a broken hip? Maybe a whiter shade of hair. And finally, first time ever I forgot your face. Then there are the text abbreviations that only the elderly among us can truly appreciate. BTW, bring the wheelchair. BYOT, bring your own teeth. LWO, Lawrence Welk is on. WAITT, who am I talking to? And finally, IMHO, is my hearing aid on? I hope these didn't offend you, but don't worry, you'll likely soon forget them. Now, what was I getting at? Oh yes, the aging process. What about it? Solomon is going to describe quite accurately the aging process here in chapter 12. It is good to be reminded how chapter 11 ended. Unfortunately, Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury, chose to divide chapter 11 in a way that breaks the thought pattern of Solomon's writing. Consider this way of reading this passage without the chapter break that interrupts the flow. Beginning in chapter 11 and verse 8, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Now, let me say that the first 7 verses of chapter 12 were quite a mystery to me in my younger days. What is Solomon talking about? The moon and stars, the keepers of the house, the grasshoppers, silver cord, and golden bowl. Now, studying this passage certainly helped. Yet even better was my own experiences with the aging process. Sure, I look like I've been drinking regularly from the fountain of youth, but I can assure you that even though I look as though I am 39, I am not, in fact, 39. Solomon admonishes the young person to be mindful of their Creator. Think on, bring to remembrance, as the Hebrew word means. Not merely God, although that is certainly implied, but more to the point, your Creator, that which brought this world and you and me and everything that dwells on earth. Now, what or when are those evil days, and what is it that is such that brings no pleasure in them? Solomon describes rather well and to the point those days that come in the advanced years at the end of life. Here's how the Good News translation, also the known as the Today's English Version, has rendered this passage. So remember your Creator while you are still young, before those dismal days and years come when you'll say, I don't enjoy life. That is when the light of the sun, the moon, and the stars will grow dim for you, and the rain clouds will never pass away. Then your arms that have protected you will tremble, and your legs, now strong, will grow weak. Your teeth will be too few to chew your food, and your eyes too dim to see clearly. Your ears will be deaf to the noise of the street. You'll barely be able to hear the mill as it grinds, or music as it plays. But even the song of a bird will wake you from sleep. You'll be afraid of high places, and walking will be dangerous. Your hair will turn white. You will hardly be able to drag yourself along, and all desire will be gone. While each of these taken alone is not a guarantee that the age process and experience of such a malady will be that way, but the overall picture of old age is accurately depicted. The above version is as good a commentary on the passage as what a more wordy attempt would render. Then we have the rather grim description of death's occurrence. The mourners go about the streets in the funeral procession. Other rather obscure portraits of death with the silver cord, the golden bowl, the shattered picture, and the broken wheel of the cistern. Each of these are a rather poetic description of the end of life. Yet we recognize instantly the phrase, and the dust returns to the earth as it was. For so this has been used aforetime to describe death. Consider the first time in Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And Zophar declared to Job in Job chapter 20, verse 11, his bones are full of his youthful vigor, but it will lie down with him in the dust. Is there a simple, concise, succinct meaning behind Solomon's admonition here? What is the reason that the young man should remember now your Creator in the days of your youth? Is or are the reason or reasons that when one is old they may be too set in their ways to repent and acknowledge their Creator? Perhaps because there is no certainty that one will live that long. Maybe that your life may be long and prosperous and that evils may not come upon you. Would time dull one's memory of the lessons Solomon has taught and render them and us callous to the gratitude and thankfulness for that which we have received from our Creator? We may lose sight that He is our Creator and that all we have and all that we are and ever will be is in His hands. Perhaps it is maybe one or more or all of these, and perhaps others that are not here contemplated. Whatever it may be, we are wise to contemplate our Creator today, while strength, vigor, and sound mind are with us. Have you remembered your Creator this day? And Lord willing, join us again tomorrow for our final lesson in a study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. Welcome to Lesson 31, our final lesson in the study of the Book of Ecclesiastes. The title of today's lesson is The End of the Matter. Our verses for today are found in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 9 through 14. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, with every secret thing, whether good or evil. I had a pat solution for almost every problem, every question, test, quiz, or any other kind of dilemma that arose in my education experience growing up. Just give me the answer and I'll figure out if I'm right or wrong. I still use that faulty formula today. I see these mathematical equations posted quite frequently to trick people. For example, 6 divided by 2 times, in parentheses, 1 plus 2 equals, and I always want to give the answer of 9, but it's actually 1. And in keeping with my maxim of just the answer, please, I'm not going to explain how you get the answer other than the acronym PEMDAS. It stands for, never mind. My daughter has a saying that she will use with almost all my conversations. Land the plane, Dad. I'll be rambling on about some story that she apparently finds rather tedious, and her desire is for me to simply get to the end of my tale. And she will interrupt me in the middle by saying, Land the plane, Dad. I'm somewhat baffled as to why she doesn't want to hear the riveting story of why I collect thimbles and the tales of how I came to be in possession of each and every one. The reality is, I'm quite sure that many a parishioner sitting in the pews on Sundays wishes the preacher would land the plane a little quicker than he does. After all, why take 35 minutes to explain the advantages of telling the truth when you can simply tell them in one brief moment? Don't lie. I think people will grasp that. Or how about kids? Do what your parents tell you when they tell you to do it. They don't need a 45-minute lecture on the merits of obedience and the copious examples and anecdotes. Even better, perhaps just jot it down on a postcard and mail it to them. Do you think that's oversimplifying things a bit too much? There are 5,579 words, give or take, 222 verses, and 12 chapters that comprise the Book of Ecclesiastes. It takes Solomon 5,530 words, give or take, 220 verses, 11 3/4 chapters to give us the answer to life. The answer is found in verse 13. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Two things. Fear God, keep His commandments. But here's the thing. Would it mean as much without the narrative of Solomon's life, his observations and perspective? For the person who says, just give me the answer, well, perhaps that's all that's needed. However, consider Solomon's Book of Proverbs. Without the first 9 chapters, will the last 22 chapters mean as much? Again, if you just want the answers or to simply land the plane, then you are left with more questions. Questions like, well, what if I choose not to do this? Or what if I just do it my way? Now we have a reason. Even with this, people will still choose to find out for themselves what life is all about. Haven't we found to be true what Solomon declared in Ecclesiastes 12:12? My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness to the flesh. We have spent 31 sessions in daily devotionals and read every word in this book of Solomon's. Surely you have came to the same conclusion that I have. We've barely scratched the surface. Yet we have examined in many ways the life of Solomon and have tried to see through the eyes of he who declared was the wisest man to ever have lived. He allowed us to see his imperfect life, his careless living and vain choices. We discovered that what he has said was of a truth when he declared in verses 9 through 11. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. With him, as with us, sometimes these words are like the goad that keep the stubborn beast of burden in line. But they are also like that nail firmly fixed. They hold together with certainty all that is built with them. We may chide and criticize Solomon for poor choices along the way. Yet he learned in the end that all his Creator says and commands are for our good, and with obedience will come blessings. We can do no better than to follow all that God has given for us to do. Did Solomon answer those first two questions posed in chapter 1? What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And the second, is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in ages before us. In the first and second question, we find the answer wrapped up in his grand finale. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. From the Garden of Eden, through the patriarchs, the law, and into the cross of Christ, what does man gain for all his toils, if not to please God? In all that comes before us, no matter how new it seems, it must be measured by the same standard. Is it that which will come about and then perish under the sun? Or is it that which will bring glory to our Creator? Is it a chasing after wind and a vanity of vanities? Solomon makes a profound statement in his book of Proverbs. In fact, he makes it twice. In Proverbs 14:12 and again in Proverbs 16:15. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon shows time after time this maxim in life. Truly, people will find fulfillment in pleasure, happiness, and drink, as we read in chapter 2. People will seek fulfillment in producing great works with their hands, houses, and material accomplishments of all manner. Money gathered up in great amounts, entertainment of all kinds. They may seek fulfillment in education and the gaining of knowledge. All of this found in chapter 2. And continuing on, Solomon observes the world around in which he dwells. On, and we almost at times want to tell him, land the plane. But he must go on, as we have noted in the beginning, to tell about vanity 31 times of a life lived with sights set only upon this world. Yet Solomon's last statement reaches beyond this life when he proclaims in verse 14, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Just what Paul said 1,000 years in the future of Solomon in 1 Corinthians 4:5. Therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness, and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his commendation from God. And the writer of Hebrews as well in Hebrews 4:13. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. And finally, when John declared in Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 and 13, and I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. My challenge to you is to read this book of Ecclesiastes regularly, as I have done over the years. I believe you will find, as I have, that each journey through this book will yield an abundant harvest, well worth your labors. I have found all of God's Word to be worth all the time and effort that I can put into reading, studying, and meditating upon it. Have you found that to be true in your life? And Lord willing, I hope that you will continue to search for truth in God's Word to guide your life in this life and on into eternity. And may the Lord bless you in that pursuit.